idea was to bring together all people who were working in multiple different areas of life writing into a single research space. And over the years, that's changed and grown what the group has done. Early on, we had lots of conferences and that kind of typical things. We had publications that came out of the joint work, and we had a very strong collection of work that came together as a result of a conference related to life writing and human rights I believe that was in 2012, so 10 years ago. So since that time, a lot of the work of the Life Narrative Research Group has become external. So it's about seeking external funding, external collaboration, external partners to do specific kinds of socially impactful work. So rather than sort of only academic work, what we're looking at now are projects, say projects funded by the UK government and other kinds of funding sources, UNICEF, the United Nations, to use some of the material that we've gathered over time, which is about how certain kinds of forms of writing can help support recovery from trauma. So about ways we can use that, across the world, really. So that's what the project, Life Narrative Group is mainly focused on now, is those external projects. Began to become very interested in certain kind of rhetorical strategies that I noticed were being used in the works of published writers, so people like Virginia Woolf or Thomas Hardy or Charles Dickens or Nabokov, or writers who are otherwise completely different. And noticing that actually a lot of these writers were using similar rhetorical strategies, similar kinds of things like repetition, fragmentation, and that kind of thing in their writing. And often the writers who had done that were those who had, I subsequently discovered, themselves had an experience of trauma, had what we might refer to as traumatic past experience. So I became interested in that on the one hand, and then also because I was doing these applied projects where we were thinking about how writing can help to support mental well-being and recovery, began to think about the ways in which that might be so. How does writing actually help? What kinds of writing? Are there specific forms of writing that are more supportive and helpful than others? So yes, that turned into, really now my life's work, which is really around identifying certain forms of writing that might be helpful in given situations to given people, depending on their past experiences. What our projects tend to do is to use kind of formulations of strategies for writing, in which the person, the survivor, can express emotion without necessarily divulging the worst thing that ever happened to them. So I don't think it's not that not that writing is necessarily cathartic, but that expressing emotion and being able to detach by putting it on a page, people are able to detach from that emotion to some extent. And sometimes that's enough to allow the person to be able to begin to process that emotion. Because if trauma is really memory that's poorly processed, so it's memory that becomes trapped in the present tense, in the short-term memory area of the brain. It's sort of, misfiled, put in the wrong place, so that every time we are reminded of that experience, whether through, usually through some kind of sensory event, so a bright light or a loud sound or something like that, that can trigger, and we know that word, that's used a lot now, right? The idea of triggering, but that it can trigger that memory, and then the traumatized person would feel that as if it was happening right now. So the purpose of writing, and expressive writing of the kind that we work with in our projects, is to express the emotion in such a way as it can be processed and put in the correct part of the brain, really, to be sort of refiled as a past event, which is an important event in someone's life, but isn't the only part of their life. And that's really another really important part of sort of trauma storytelling research, is that is to have identified that what often happens is people who are traumatized can sometimes become stuck in this identity of themselves as a victim, as a traumatized person, as that being the single most salient thing that ever happened to them. And so part of the process of expressive writing of the kind that we do is to enable the person to understand the trauma as one part of their life, in a life that has both good and bad.